World War I is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, which is one reason that I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you, certainly in this centennial era that it's a goal of mine personally to try and kind of expand my horizons a bit. So with that, the interest I have in the Capronis is purely enthusiast. It's not something I have to work with on a daily basis. It's just something that I've always found kind of interesting. And you know, some of you probably seen the Miyazaki movie features Caproni. It came out recently. I guess following that same kind of enthusiasm over the kind of exoticism evidenced by Caproni as aircraft. So what I'd like to do today is basically kind of represent a bit of a process. And my goal with this presentation, because I am about eye deep in a dissertation at the moment, which is completely unrelated to World War I kind of set myself a goal. I wasn't going to spend more than about 40 hours. So what I wanted to do was approach this with the eye. If I was going to go forward with some sort of project, whether it's a book or some other type of publication on Caproni aircraft in World War II to some extent, what could I generate? What resources are available? What could I do to kind of push the envelope? So it was really an experiment. Within about a 40-hour time frame, what could I do in archives and other resources to really kind of expand the base of knowledge? So obviously there's a lot of information out there already. There's kind of the enthusiast press literature on the aircraft themselves. There's been some things recently that have come out that are quite useful. Of course, the Northern Bombing Group is really kind of a crucial intersection with the Caproni aircraft, and kind of represents some of the problems associated with the whole American effort in bombing aircraft. There are some other things out. The Museo Caproni in Trento is helped push a lot of interesting publications over the years. This is a particularly useful one, so it's basically a scrapbook, which is quite well done. So these are some of the resources that I kind of used to start out with. So National Air and Space Museum, we've got two essentially archival centers. So some of you may have used the facilities here at Udvar-Házy. Downtown, though, we still have what we call the tech files, and those are often bypassed by researchers. And the tech files are kind of a miscellaneous compilation of materials that accrued in a variety of ways over the years. And because of that, it does tend to get overlooked. However, it is quite extensive, and you never know what you're going to find. So I would always recommend that's kind of a useful first stop. A lot of what you'll find there are maybe previous publications or article references. There's photos in there as well. So that's a pretty good spot to start. Turns out the Museo Caproni at various times since World War II has had a fairly close relationship with the Smithsonian and has passed on a lot of information. So certainly it's going to be one of the better repositories to come to in the United States to be able to have access to that. So short of a trip to Italy and the archives there at the Museo Caproni, this is a pretty good place to come. There are some specific collections here at Udvar-Házy that are very worth looking into, very much worth looking into. So there is a collection that was donated by the family of Norman Sweetser, who was there at Foggia, trained, and then flew some operational flights with the Italians. And so there's a couple things. There's one that's a series of scrapbooks. A lot of it's related to his later reunions, but there is a really fantastic scrapbook from the time that I highly recommend. There's not much posted online from this at all, but anyway, if you have this information here, it'll point you in the right direction. This 8th Aviation Instruction Center photo album, also quite useful. So that was the facility at Foggia that was doing the training for American personnel on the Capronis. Lastly, there is a collection here that is woefully unknown, and that's really, I think, kind of a fault of ourselves in not making it more widely known and available, certainly. But if you do know about it, it is a fantastic resource. And this is the what's called the Wright McCook Field still photograph collection. And this is, if you've ever used the Air Force collection at National Archives, for instance, you have some idea of the number of images involved. This is actually probably a little bit bigger than that. It's absolutely monstrous. And what it is, it's all the Air Development Center photos that were done of projects of all types. So everything from airframe to manufacturing to instruments to electronics, armament, it's all in there. And it's documented from about 1918 up through, I think, 1972-ish. So just about anything under the sun that passed through Wright McCook Field in terms of technical development. Absolutely fantastic. It's a little light on the World War I material because it really didn't get going till 1918. It's not like they don't really have any of the Langley Field stuff in there, for instance. But it really is fantastic, particularly if your interests go out from the World War I era. That said, it is even for people that stop in 1918, it is well worth looking at. One of the great collections that's at Library of Congress that is digitized at very high resolution is the Harrison Ewing collection. It's somewhat difficult to search in that the captions are not particularly all that well matched to what you're seeing, but there is a lot of World War I aviation represented. This collection really is just covering the Washington, D.C. area, so this has a really good coverage of things that were happening at College Park. It has, even before the war, it has really good coverage of things that happen at Bowling or Anacostia. It has really good coverage of all the kind of demonstration flights that occurred at Potomac Park and the Polo Grounds here in D.C. So that's, you'll see a couple images from that. So National Archives, of course, is the kind of elephant in the room. I don't know how many of you are kind of regulars at the National Archives. A few of you. Okay, well, you know, if you're in the area, there's a few things there that really shouldn't be missed. The document section of the National Archives is a pretty foreboding experience, even for somebody that's been going for a long time. It can be maddening and frustrating, and frankly, the staff there is not particularly nice in that part of the organization. So, you know, unless you're really into it, you know, but there are some important things. So one important thing, I mentioned all the things that were happening at Wright McCook Field that we have the photos for. Well, the documents, the correspondence that goes with those photos, well, that's all out at National Archives. And most of that's in the so-called Sarah Clark files. So there are a few things that relate directly to Caproni's that you might want to go take a look at there. But the real fun is to be had in the still pictures section. So if you go up to the 5th floor out there at College Park, they have they're much nicer out there, much friendlier. They're pretty helpful, won't give you a hard time. And what you can see there, it's the closest thing you're going to have to a time machine. It really is. I highly recommend it. So one of the collections out there is tied directly to the Wright McCook Field still collection that's here at Uberhazy. What they have a grouping that's just the airplanes pulled out of that. In some cases, those images were pulled from the files that we have. So if you want a complete picture, you kind of got to marry those two things up. So that's you know, anything that, again, an aircraft that passed through Wright or McCook Field, they're going to have documented quite extensively. So you'll see a few things from there. RG-80G is the big Navy photo collection, and many hundreds of thousands of images. There's pretty good coverage from this era. I only have a few things that relate to Caproni, so only when they were testing the Mustin Sea Sled in 1980 is really about the only relevant thing I have in that department. But the really fantastic one that I absolutely highly recommend that you take the time to go out and look at is the Signal Corps collection out there. So the World War I Signal Corps collection at National Archives is really something to behold. Now it's a bit unwieldy at first. It uses an old card catalog finding system, but like a good card catalog from the day, you know, spend a little bit of time with it and you can actually find some really good things. What's interesting about it is that the boxes that hold these images are pretty scattershot. So you might be moving from France to Langley Field to Italy in the same box sometimes. And it's you're going to get everything that you can imagine in there. So there's everything from industry to Western Front to aviation training. It's all in there, all mixed up. And whatever your focus is, whether it's the aircraft or it's the personnel, it's the armament, it's the equipment of the aircraft, extremely well documented. And so just in my brief survey that I was trying to get done within my 40 hours, there's probably 150 images at least, and I didn't get through it all there in that collection, just related to the Caproni. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of stuff at the front in that collection related to the Capronis. The really kind of remarkable thing that came out for me during this little project that I was completely unaware of, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with, is the RG-165WW. Has anybody used this before? No. Okay, this is a brand new, from what I can tell, brand new uploaded collection. And it's in process. They're still working through it. But you can see that this is the, it's called the American Unofficial Collection of World War I Photographs, and it's in the records of the War Department. So if you go down here, you see this 776 file units. These are not 776 scanned images. These are just a grouping, a basically 776 folders of images just of what they've done so far. And of these, I think there's at least probably 200 that are aircraft related. And then some of those might have 70 images in them, some of them might have 10. So, you know, just this is the first thing that comes up, right? So we go to aircraft accidents. And this one, just this first folder of accidents, and I think there's maybe 6 or 7 folders of accidents. This one has 81 images. These are scanned at really high resolution, you know, with the documentation in it. So, you know, you can zoom in on the page. They're completely downloadable. Really, really good stuff. So, if you haven't seen this before, I highly, highly recommend taking a look, because just with this alone, I think you can occupy many days. And it looks like they're less than halfway through this whole project. Fortunately, it looks like there's pretty good coverage of aviation at the moment. So, you know, there's many folders of just balloons. There's hydroplanes are a separate category where there's dozen or so folders just in that area. So this was really kind of the great find, and I certainly wasn't aware of this at all before. So I think this is you know, kind of a under the radar centennial project that they're doing. But I think for all of you that work in this field, this is something that you might find of great interest, and would highly recommend. And would highly recommend spending a little bit of time with it. RG-342A FH is the big standard Air Force photo collection, which is, you can search that here at Udvar Hazy if you want to see the captions, but if you actually want to pull the actual prints, you have to go out to National Archives to do that. So there's a fair bit on Capronis there. There's a few images, for instance, of the handful of CA-5s that made it to France for the Northern Bombing Group. Might be a good place if you ever need images of those. How many of you have a Fold 3 subscription? Okay, so this is another kind of wonder of the age. It's going to cost you about $75 annually. it is well worth it. So what's on there that's just worth? For one thing, if you do World War II stuff, all of the combat theater photography from that 342 FH is all on there, text searchable, which is really good. But in terms of World War I, it's the Grell histories that are absolutely critical. So there's, what, 76,000 pages scanned in at pretty good resolution from the Grell paper. So it's all manner of things. So here we have the search for Caproni under the Grell papers. 960 pages out of the Grell papers have text that shows Caproni, right? So you know, if we go in here, and I'd have to log in here to get the full thing, but it's pretty amazing what you can actually pull out of that. So really a great resource. If you want film, you know, there's a couple resources. The one that I have an ethical dilemma with is something called Critical Past. I don't know if you've ever seen it. These guys, in my kind of view, they're basically pirates. That's about where I kind of see their standing. What they do, and I'll give them points for being clever, is that out at the National Archives, where they have hundreds of thousands of reels of film, the way the process works, as it used to be, you would go and actually physically pull a supplementary copy of a film reel, 16 or 35 millimeter, and you reel it up on a projector, and you watched it, and if you like it, they'd go and send it to the lab and put it on whatever medium. Well, over the last decade or decade and a half, what's been happening is the National Archives, when it goes through that reproduction process to make the films that people can screen, they put them on DVD. And so they've been accumulating a large number of these DVDs out there at the National Archives that anybody can go out and view and even duplicate. And so this company is kind of what they've done is they just go out and copy those DVDs essentially, and have accumulated this massive, you know, hundreds of thousands of hours of digital film copies based upon what other people have actually funded and put all the effort into. And then they snip these out and put them online at enormous costs at fees for documentary companies. And having worked with a lot of documentary companies in the current age, I can tell you they're horribly lazy. They will go and just look on this site. They won't go out to National Archives. They can't be bothered to go do it themselves, which means they miss tons of stuff. So unless it's been duped and put on the DVD, they're not going to find it. So they miss a ton of stuff. So the one thing I'll give these guys credit for is because they have this online tool to sell their product of kind of lifted digital content from the National Archives, is that you can at least screen it. Now, it used to be when this thing first opened, you could actually figure out what file they had pulled there at National Archives to get it from. You can still do that without a whole lot of effort. If you go into the film search section there at National Archives and put in some relevant keywords, you can probably narrow it down and figure out exactly where it is, and you can go out to the National Archives yourself, pull the DVD, and save yourself $1,000 from what they're going to charge you. So anyway, there are some Caproni things that are actually quite interesting that we can take a look at. So yeah, this is their little interface. So you know, you get this little low-res kind of preview. So here we have Italian. I believe this is Italian, not French. Actually, this may be French production. So the French had their own license-built version of the Caproni that used radial engines. Then they also were buying Italian Capronis as well. So this is the Ca.5 that we see here. So this gives you some idea of the, and this is the monster, the Ca.4, the triplane. So we've got a few more of interest. So this is the This is one of the
CEPs.
Yep. So yeah, we can see the. Sorry, I said radial. I meant rotary. So we can see the French aircraft being loaded up.
The bomb goes this way.
Don't rest the fuse on the floor.
Don't make those statements.
You almost did.
That's really neat.
So this might be. There's a lot of footage. I think it's near Verdun. Well, like I say, if you want this in high resolution, it's actually quite easy to get. So within a little bit of time, all you have to do is just go pull a DVD off the shelf and load it in one of their machines, and you can actually transfer that. So this is one of the CA5 Liberty-powered versions that was built on Long Island at Elizabeth, New Jersey. This one was built by Standard Aero.
Any idea how many they built?
So there were 2 built by Standard and 3 by Fisher in Detroit. Fisher Body Works. Now the question that that was apparent to me that there's not a whole lot of information on is what was the Italian production of the CA5. Wikipedia says something over 600, but from what I understand, I think we're actually talking in the dozens rather than hundreds. So I think that is not filled out very well from the literature that I've been able to find. So maybe if I spend a little bit more time with Gorell, I'll come up with the answer on that. So this might be one of the Fisher aircraft. So only one of the 5 aircraft was actually completed before the end of the war. See the large. So this was a design variation that the Italians did once they were starting to look at the Liberty-powered version.
There must have been a big performance difference between using the rotary and the Liberty.
So the Italians had, while this was ostensibly a much improved version of the CA3, which really went back. They started with the CA1, which is basically 3 100 horsepower. I think Fiat engines on that one. And we're gradually increasing up to, by the time they got to the Liberties, I think they were in excess of 600 horsepower. The problem was the Italians had terrible engine difficulties, so they went from the Fiats to the Isaldo Frescinis, and then to I think this might be Semperini flying. Let's see. Last one here.
Italian front.
So actually, I think this is a this is Italian flown, but on the Western Front. So this is one of the Italian squadrons. I see there. They actually might be.
They had a bombing group. I think it was the 18th.
Yeah, this
on the Western Front.
Yeah, I think this one was listed as being based near Verdun. So I think the this was a kind of they were doing a little bit of film work to show the Verdun front. So here we see the. So these are actually pages from the Gorell histories. These were available separately out of that Signal Corps collection. But so we see the 3 aircraft here, and so this is the later up-engine version of the CA-3 that's got the more powerful isotope-Fascinis in them. So got the big CA-4. So there was at least one of these brought to the U.S. There might have been 2 from what I can tell. I'm still trying to kind of figure that one out. The Royal Naval Air Service had 6 of them, but altogether there were maybe 3 dozen of these constructed. So this was intended to be, there was a huge fight, within the Air Service over whether it should be Handley Page or it should be these for the night bombing aircraft. Colonel Bowling, was a strong believer in the Caproni over the Handley Page, and so that caused a lot of tension. The story of the Capronis, I think, can really be summed up, as one of cultural disconnect. So where Gianni Caproni himself, I think, was really a very enthusiastic figure and very happy to work with the Americans, and by all accounts, the Americans that were in Foggia and Milan and elsewhere got along great with them. That there were just these cultural differences, particularly over licensing, that caused huge problems. So the Wilson administration did not want to essentially license individually with foreign manufacturing firms. They wanted essentially to negotiate reciprocal government agreements. So, the idea here was that we would be supplying Liberty engines and getting airframes back. And the way it worked out was that Caproni himself kept pushing Italian personnel to basically set up the factories, run the factories. In the United States was the model that Caproni really wanted, and wanted a licensing agreement, and that led to no end of trouble. So there was always, whether it was the training or the manufacturing or the combat operations, there was this essentially frustrated collaboration, I think is the good way to phrase it, between the two parties. So there was some successes on all those counts. But at the end of the day, it was a pretty challenging business to try and make this work. So here we see the prototype CA-5, and we can see that they're advertising essentially almost 900 horsepower with the Fiats on here. So this is from the Wright Field, that Wright McCook Field collection that I mentioned that's here. So we can see that. Kind of later on, they're doing some trials to try and compare the aircraft, and it gives you a pretty good indication as to where things stand. So the Caproni is doing fairly well relative to the Martin, and you can see that they're not really big fans of the Handley Page. The Handley Page production turned also out to be a kind of a disaster. The problem was Britain was modifying and updating that aircraft, evolving it fairly rapidly. So as soon as the drawings came over to the U.S., they were already obsolete. So as soon as tooling was produced in the United States to manufacture Handley Pages, it was already replaced by something else that was sent over on the next convoy. and unfortunately it was just no end of frustration. So the Handley Page program didn't turn out any better than the Caproni program. But the American experience with the Capronis is really most defined by what happened at Foggia. So this was the big training school. So this is where the Air Service pilots were getting most of their exposure to bombing aircraft. And so the school, and I can read you a little bit from the Gorell papers here, about the kind of numbers involved. So it says during the continuation of the school at Foggia, out of 457 students who had been received at various times, 406 graduated from the preliminary piloting course, and those were not all on Capronis. Some of that was on Pomilio and some other aircraft. They were doing introductory training as well, so it was essentially an ab initio program to take them all the way through the bombers. Some of the Americans did get trained up on the big CA-4 triplane, but most of them were operating in the CA-3s. So this gives you some idea. Also, other things that can be found in the Gorell papers. Fatal accidents we see there. We see the layout of the South Camp, which was the primary training field there at Foggia. There was also, and keep in mind, this is down essentially. If you're looking at the boot of Italy, this is kind of just above the back of the heel, is where we're looking at. So fairly far down on the Adriatic. Here's some of their cross-country courses that they were required to demonstrate when they were in the Caproni. So these are essentially bombing raid training that was conducted there. Some other kind of interesting documents that you can find. So you can find the combat deployments, which were mostly in the Milan area. So the Americans did fly mostly on CA-3s and CA-5s with Italian crews. So typically there was not an entirely American crew that was flying these missions, so they were Italian aircraft pretty much all the way around. So whether they were the CA-3s there at Foggia for training, or they were the CA-3s or CA-5s being used on the front with the Austrians, they were basically integrated crews, Italian-American crews on Italian aircraft. The document on the right are the airframes, the CA-5s, that were deployed to go to France, fly over the Alps to support the Navy's Northern Bombing Group. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, the Northern Bombing Group was a campaign to use heavy bombers to attack principally U-boat installations. So it was the Navy trying to eliminate the U-boat menace from the air. So it was seen as it's kind of interesting to see the gymnastics that the Navy was using to try and claim authority for acquiring fleets of heavy bombers. Obviously they were kind of making the argument, well, this is a naval target, so it should be Navy aircraft that are performing it. Of course, the problem is that the majority of these aircraft, and if you can look closely at the document, you'll see that a great many of these aircraft were wrecked either at the factory or along the way, caused by a variety of things. Mechanical difficulty, of course, was one part of it, but a big part was inexperience. So these were mixed crews. These were both U.S. Navy and Army Air Service personnel that were flying these aircraft. So here we see the Italian CA-5s, the early model. These had, again, pretty poor performing engines. They were a real disappointment when they first came out. Here we see, and this is also from Fold 3, I'll give you some idea of what you can find. So here we have some of these integrated American-Italian crews. This is a pretty good indication of some of the difficulties that we see there at Foggia. So on the right, we see Fiorella LaGuardia, Captain LaGuardia, who headed up the training program there at Foggia, and then oversaw combat operations from about August to October of 18 up near Milan, and then he was deployed back to the United States before the armistice. the gentleman to his right, our left, is the head of the Italian head of the Foggia school, and you know, this is a pretty good indication of the problem. I can't immediately find his name. I'm sure it's given some time I can locate it, but I think it's kind of telling that he doesn't show up in the captions. He shows up in the pictures. He doesn't show up in the captions, and he's not showing up in much of the Gorell history. So that kind of gives you an indication of the tensions that these kind of underlying cultural tensions that were present between Gorell and between LaGuardia and some of the air service personnel and the Italians. Just bear with me a second here. I'll read this for you. So fatalities were fairly few for the most part. You saw the list of training. There were some combat losses, and I'll read you the description of what happened here. I think I hear Erasmo Pinheiro. Okay, so this is Lieutenant, on the left we have Lieutenant James Ball, and on the right, Lieutenant Dewitt Coleman, and their the caption I think said Foggia, but this may be actually on the front. And so these, they were both killed October 27th, 1918, over Vittorio Veneto, and I'll read you the citation here. It says, 2 casualties occurred during the period, and this is the combat operations period from June to November. And so Ball and Coleman, let's see, it says they were attacked while unescorted by 5 Austrian Chasse planes and were brought down in flames, but only after they had succeeded in getting 2 of the attackers. It says they were buried in the communal cemetery at I think it's Ravine, Vittorio, and so there was it says there was one wounded, so only 1 pilot that was wounded. So losses were fairly low at the time. So here's one of the so this collection that we're looking at now is the Sweetser scrapbook that I mentioned that's here at Uvarhazy. This is really a wonderful collection, as I said before. I highly recommend coming out and taking a look at it if this is your area of interest. So this guy was kind of popular amongst the Americans as an instructor, but also because he looped one of the CA-3s. So that was, and we can see here that the crowd kind of celebrating him after the flight there. There is a photo in one of the Museo Caproni books that's got a CA-3 and it looks like he's hopping a hangar, and it claims that it's during the loop, which I don't think is possible. So a little bit of caution. Now we see Caproni himself there, Gianni Caproni on the left, and certainly he was a very frequent visitor to the schools, also to the combat operations. Really took a personal interest in anything that happened with his aircraft. And by all accounts, he was a very popular person both amongst the Italians as well as the Americans. Here we see LaGuardia with Caproni in front of one of the CA-5s. I just thought this was kind of a neat picture. There's tons of daily life pictures there at Foggia. So this is a Maurice Farman, I think it's a 9. That they had converted to a little runabout. So these were being used for primary training, their ab initio training there. So here we see there might be a few Americans on that one, I'm not sure. So the big CA-4s, that unusual arrangement on the bottom there, that's the bomb rack, so you can actually see, I don't have a pointer, but right along here you can see the mounts for the bombs would hang either side of that. It's kind of interesting. It was Caproni kept coming up with a modular system for mounting things there. So you'll see ones with passenger cars stuck on the bottom. You'll see they had one for one really big bomb they could put on there. I don't know, 2,000 pounds or what, but a fairly hefty bomb. So we see some of the Italians there at Foggia. So here we have a mixed crew. we know who these guys are. Yeah, so these, this is at Taliedo, which was the Caproni factory up in the north, and so this is mostly, I think, American mechanics. I guess that we're going to be doing a lot of the maintenance for the CA-5. So see a few air service pilots and a couple Italians mixed in there. Of course, Caproni's right in the middle. So here we have, again, we see Caproni hanging out with, I don't know who the officer is there. And again, the captions on a lot of these, unfortunately, are fairly poor. This was actually after the war. This was a group of West Point cadets, I think the class of 21, that were touring around about 6 months after the armistice, and so they were stopping by to see the operations there. So this is, I mentioned Norman Sweetser, whose collection this is. We see him on the left, and on the right is Willis Fitch, who actually has written kind of the English language memoir about the Caproni operation. So you can his book's readily available these days. We see it looks like we've got some representatives of the maybe of the Northern Bombing Group have stopped by. So this probably is also at the Caproni factory. This is a fairly well-known, famous image. So we see this is essentially on the combat front there near Milan. So we've got on the left we've got LaGuardia. It's Major General Andrea Maggiorotti, I think. In the center, he was also a member of Parliament. Captain Federico Zappaloni on the right, who apparently LaGuardia actually did fly combat missions with. And then the gunner in the front is Tello Fermani. One of the more interesting things was Caproni's infrastructure that he had. So to hangar these aircraft, because they were a real beast to move on the ground, you know, the nose wheel was really just to keep from burying the nose. So takeoff attitude was maintained during the roll by basically having the skids on the ground. So ground handling was a real problem with the CG of the aircraft. So what they did is you can see that this is actually mounted on a dolly that's on a track. And so what Caproni had come up with were these really elongated hangars that had two sets of these tracks. And so you'd have the Caproni staggered, one facing right, one facing left. And so they could stack them in the hangar, running them down the track on these dollies. So really kind of a clever system, but he was obviously putting a lot of effort into coming up with this infrastructure to house the aircraft. So here we see some of the Brits that have come out to see the CA-4s. So unfortunately not much context on what's happening there. A few images. Like I said, there's not a whole lot out at National Archives in terms of seeing the combat operations. So so far all I've been able to find, some of these kind of mixed, Italian and Americans kind of hanging out together. This is from a document that's in our tech files, which I had mentioned. So there was I guess kind of at the time there's a document that counts it chronicles the Caproni operations with the Italians from about from its start in 16, I think, all the way up into early 18. But that's a really interesting document. So this was one of the longer operations, which I think was something like a 900-kilometer flight that they had to attack a target. We see there's tons of CA-3 images out there. So here's a couple of the French-built versions from the Signal Corps collection. This is a rather interesting image, and so this is from one of the general photo collections here at Udvar-Házy. And so this is the Paul Ernst collection, and this is a captured, an Austro-Hungarian captured CA-3. And then we can see it looks like they're doing a run-up here on it. We've got another one that was wrecked here. This was brought down by Josef Kies and Kurt Fiedler of Flieger Company 24 on August 25th, 1916. And this is actually a new acquisition that we have here at the museum. It's an album of Flieger Company 17, and from what I understand, that's a pretty good source if you're interested. So here's a close-up of the same aircraft.
You mean Josef Kies?
There you go.
KISS?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, it was one of his earliest of 19 victories, half of whom he brought down and captured.
And here we've got another one of our French ones. So just to give you an idea of just the sheer volume. Now I have all these in very high resolution, so I scan most of these when I come across them at 1200 DPI. So you go out and do it yourself at National Archives. I'm happy to make any of these available to you if you want any of them. So pretty much everything in here except the Fold 3 images, you know, I've got at least at 3,000 pixels across. So happy to share it with you. I'm not trying to make any claim on a future product here, so I'm happy to share whatever you want. I can point you in the right direction, make any of the stuff available to you. There's a nice little size comparison. Now that's actually not a CA3, that's the CA5. So the later one. This is at Langley. So one of the CA3s was brought over to the U.S. in I think about September or late summer of 1917, and you can see they're actually working hard on the permanent hangars there at Langley. The unfortunate thing about the Italian aircraft brought over to the U.S. in 1917 is that the Italians insisted on flying the aircraft themselves. They really wouldn't let the Americans fly them. So it was, we'll bring them over to show them to you, but we're not really going to let you play with them. And so there's tons of, I literally have over, I think, 100 images of this aircraft, the 4051. And again, it's mostly flown by the Italians. That's also at Langley. We see the more temporary hangars there, more Langley. Drawing crowd at Langley. This is actually here in Washington, so this is at Potomac Park. I think this is later in September of 18, so not too long after the aircraft had been would started its test flights there at Langley. It was flown up to DC. So this gathered quite a crowd. They had a really hard landing apparently, though. It was actually damaged at landing, so it took a couple days to repair before they could fly it out. So this is kind of over by what they call the Polo Grounds at Potomac Park. So of course everybody came out to see the aircraft. So this was also the essentially the I guess they were initially the polo barns, but they were turned into hangars kind of in the World War I era. One of the things, of course, that was happening here was some of those early airmail operations were actually done out of the same facility. So the pilot was I think a Lieutenant Renati, and he unfortunately came to a bad end. So this was, I think, May 17th of 18 up on Long Island. So he was unfortunately killed. Now, it's hard to tell which aircraft this is. I don't believe it's not the CA3 because we see it still flying after that. This may have been, there was a CA4 that was flown. From what I can tell, there may have been two crashes. Whether this was the CA4 or there was a second CA3, I haven't been able to determine. It's really not very clear to me. This is actually at his funeral, so this was the CA3 that we've been seeing flown by another Italian pilot for the funeral. And this was a month later on Long Island at one of the horse shows there. So I thought that was kind of a neat. They're doing a leaflet drop, kind of really interesting photo. That's also that collection that was just showing that this 165 WW. So here's the prototype for the CA4. So going back to 1916, you can see that evolved quite a bit. And so again, you can see kind of the, here we have, you can see kind of a more of a gunner's nacelle on the bottom there, compared with that other bomb rack variant. And of course, hard to have a group picture without Caproni in the center. So this is some photos from the factory here on Long Island. Sorry, this not Long Island, Elizabeth, New Jersey, of Standard Aero. So this were the first two that were built, were manufactured there. So we see the American production underway in 1918. Again, there were only two completed at this factory, but they did get a lot of attention. This is at Wright Field in 1919. So this is probably one of the Fisher, I believe this is one of the Fisher Bodyworks CA5s built in Detroit. And definitely a bit more sophisticated cockpit than what we've seen on the Italian version. Here's the, I think this is the Fisher Bodyworks first one delivered, and this is at Langley. And again, tons of coverage of these CA5s. So this, I believe, is one of the Italian Liberty-powered ones. So we were sending Liberties over to run on the Italians. And so these are all the American-built ones that we're seeing here. Langley again. So there are some coverage of some of the more exotic variants of the Caproni. So we see a float-equipped version of the CA5. Sorry, this is I think this is on Long Island. So the U.S. Navy's had a very interesting project. They actually did import one Italian-built CA5 to the U.S. for use with the Mustin, Henry Mustin, naval commander. He wanted to build on the British idea of towing gliders to launch aircraft to attack German naval facilities on the European North Coast. And his idea was to use a inverted V-hull design boat to bring an aircraft up to flying speed and then allow them to take off. So this would not be used for recovery, only for launching. So the idea was that you had a speedboat that you could get up to about 45 knots. Should be sufficient to get to take off.
45 knots.
Yeah. So now the inverted V hull design has been hugely popular over the years in a variety of things, including like PT boat design. So there's a long kind of naval architecture legacy that actually kind of comes out of this program that's quite interesting. Unfortunately, they were able, I think, to launch a lighter single-place aircraft, but the Caproni never got up to sufficient speed to lift off. And there was also, I think, when they did this test, about, I think it was 4 days after the armistice, there was a release mechanism that allowed the thing to come off the sea sled and lift off, and I think that was also, they had a mechanical fault on that. So between not quite getting it, there's so much drag on the thing, I think they weren't able to get the boat up to its intended speed, and then they had a problem with the release, and of course by that point the program's just getting cut. So they really never did make much out of it, but yeah, there's a fair bit of documentation on the testing, and so we can see them running at speed there. So there we've got the Italian float version again. Now, right after the war, Caproni was very eager to parlay his bomber experience into commercial aircraft. and so we see a wide range of prototypes. That was actually that was our West Point class on tour again in 1919. This model actually still survives. I believe this is can still be seen at the Museo Caproni, that same model. So there were a variety of different attempts to make these airliners. I think this one is called, that's the CA-57. There's that one. Now this is the CA-59. This ugly guy right here. So this is the product of that prototype model that we saw. And so there's a few images that I was seeing in these National Archives groupings that I haven't seen published anywhere else. You can see a close-up of the cabin, for instance. So this kind of shows the evolution of the Caproni thinking after the other aircraft. Now, you know, if you weren't able to tell on the CA-3, CA-4, CA-5, it's 2 tractors and a pusher. So after the war, he started to go to slightly different configurations. So now he's using you know, tandem configurations to. In this case, he's got 4 200 horsepower motors. This is the CA-66 from 1922.
Seem to be using thicker wings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a monster. And in fact, there's a version of this that is unbelievably large. So this is the one of his heavy duty ones, kind of the later 20s. This is the CA-79, which had a combined output of 2,000 horsepower. So that was kind of his heavy bomber. So after that, started to head to monoplanes. He did also, during the war, he did build I don't have it in here, but he did build a prototype one-off 700 horsepower single engine triplane as well. But anyway, that completes the presentation. And like I said, I'm more than happy to share any of that with you all. And you know, I hope, if nothing else, I've kind of pointed you towards some interesting resources. Certainly check out that 165WW grouping there, you know, which you can look at your leisure. And if you get the time, absolutely, I'd recommend heading over to that Signal Corps collection, World War I Signal Corps collection at National Archives, because it really is, it's like having your own time machine. You really will be amazed at what you find. They didn't file any of the any really poor images. Everything that's in there is a really quality image. So, and there's hundreds of thousands of them. So it's well worth taking a look at. Any questions you might have?
There's a Caproni at the Air Force Museum. Do you know its?
I do know a little bit about it. So no, I don't believe that one has any direct American history. So it was either kind of just very late war, didn't really make it, you know, into combat ops, but it was basically one that was kind of loaned back initially. I think we can tell you more about that one. It's pretty well documented, though. It's a nice example, but not necessarily tied to the American combat operations. Yep.
So, 2 questions and a statement.
Okay.
Okay. So on the RG-165WW, did you stumble upon that, or were you directed towards
No,
that?
I stumbled on it. Matter of fact, I only stumbled on it yesterday.
Well, it was very fortuitous, yeah. Do you believe that the language was an issue, the choice of Caproni versus the Hanley Page in the how the whole thing played out?
Well, it's interesting. That's I think that's a topic that kind of deserves a lot more attention, especially since there was such strong favoritism towards Caproni. So on one hand, there seems to have been a lot of misunderstandings once you got down to the detail level about how things should work. Most of the individual accounts that I've looked at so far on the experience at Foggia and elsewhere was that they got along pretty well. The Italians were good hosts. They were enthusiastic, except for the apparently merchants in town always trying to rip off the American personnel. But for the most part, it sounded like there was a sense of good feeling. I think there was a sense that particularly the CA-3 was a proven design, that it was a good aircraft, kind of a known quantity, and I think perhaps the Italians weren't talking down to them in the same way that the British were, and so there was a bit of I think maybe an easier compatibility to one degree, but a much greater challenge in working things out at the detail level. So I think there was kind of the emotional level. There was a good working relationship, but when it came down to trying to get progress towards manufacturing, to get progress towards licensing, towards fielding a common American unit, that was where things really started to run into trouble.
The last point, intersection of Jen's research on the bombing statistics and the one aspect that stood out from your presentation, Jens, was that Caproni bombing of that railhead and rail intersection on the Austro-Hungarian and the impact of that. And that was Caproni's, and I'm wondering if that was a joint American or if that was just the Italians at that bombing. And I was wondering if you would talk about that or speak about it.
I was going to ask the question after. Did you run into any combat records, mission reports type of thing in your research? Okay.
No. So the Gorell stuff, was I kind of got through the kind of first level of histories, which is mostly Foggia focused. There's if you look at it's pretty thin on terms of the kind of operational level of it. This report I think runs to I don't know, maybe this section is like 18 pages or something. So it's more it seems to be principally focused on personnel movements. It's an administrative level history of it. So. There might be some of that in there, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay. One of the things I ran across, Carl, was my data was on American-flown Capronis or piloted Capronis on the Vittorio Veneto front and everything like that, which was a War Department memo I found in the Air Force Historical Research Agency, and they listed here's the pilots, here's the missions flown, and stuff like that. So happy to show it if you're interested.
No, great, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, why don't you remind us all about that one incident and your theory on that, and it's because it's relevant to this overarching topic here.
Okay, well, one of the things that we found looking at these mission reports is, just to set the stage a little bit, the difference between tactical bombing and strategic bombing from the Army's perspective in World War I was anything that was farther than the artillery could fire was on the strategic front. So that's about 14 miles beyond the front based on the guns of the day. And what we saw in the Battle of Vittorio Veneto in the late October 1918 was that there were dirigibles and a number of aircraft used to punch a hole in the Austro-Hungarian front. And what I found was that these American bombers were flying anywhere from 20 to 50 miles beyond the front, deep into Austro-Hungarian territory, and bombing all the basically rail stations, rail yards, bridges, and other things, basically causing a freeze on their ability to reinforce the front, allowing the Italians to consolidate that victory and press forward.
So there you go, it's an intersection.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
You showed the photo of the two Americans who I don't remember if they were both killed or one of the two of them
All
was
right.
killed. And the fact that they were attacked by, I think it was something like 7 Austrian planes was what you said.
5, yeah.
That was actually something that was very unusual in bombing in World War I, was that using a large multi-engine bomber for daylight raids with fighter escorts. They were doing that with the Capronis, and that sounds like this was another example of this. And it was just extremely unusual. All of the rest of the multi-engine bombers, the Handley Pages, generally the Gotas and the Giants, and the French-built Capronis, those were all done those were all bombing at night.
That's an excellent point. And that does come out in the reports that certainly the buildup towards the American participation is really phrased in that night bombing paradigm. That you can see that's really what they're looking for. However, the operational buildup is day bombing. So apparently, very few night flights were flown at all. And if you look at the CA-4s, I mean, you actually could see they actually have a pretty significant array of lights on them, for landing. But yeah, it was definitely a daylight campaign. I think largely because the goal was night bombing, but they just didn't have the experience yet. So it was kind of assumed that the day bombing campaign, October of 18, for instance, was really kind of leading up to a night bombing campaign that just was never implemented.
Yeah, and the use of fighters as bomber escorts for these large bombers was also very unusual. Here we are.
Yeah.
But was it that both of them were killed, or,
Yes.
or one of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you.